Hi, this is Fran with Stampendous, and we're continuing my fabulous Friday Fun watercolor video series. This is video number 117, and as you can see on this model board, we are going to be featuring Christmas in July. But this first week, we are going to feature all of our fall leaves, and then the next 2 weeks, we will be working with more of Christmas. And by the last week, we're already will move ahead to winter. So Christmas in July, we start it now. So this is the Autumn Leaves clear stamp set, and the index is here, but this is the painting I did for all of the colors. See if you can get a closer look there. And you can see a lot of beautiful variations of color, and that's what we're going to do today. I'm using my spray bottle to spritz and revive all the colors in my palette. And I also have the needle tip bottle here so that I can create some little puddles. And I'm going to quickly get a whole bunch of colors primed and ready. I'm swirling my cool colors to have some gray ready. Okay, so with the berries, I'm going to start with my greens. And in this case, I want a little bit more of the fall kind of color greens. So I'm going to use my compartment here that has the yellow and the marine blue. This will give me more of the olive color. And I can have a dark shade of that, or with, whoops, well, there's yellow. Yellow over here, I can have a lighter olive green. I think that's still a little bit darker than I want, but I don't want to lose the paint, so I'm going to get some of it off my brush before I add some water. Okay, that's more what I had in mind with the light wash. So let's do this light olive green first on the leaves. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do some shadowing since I liked this kind of grayish green color. So to do that, I'm going to lift some of my green over into this compartment where I had the grays. And by putting a bit of that together, I can get, yeah, this beautiful deeper color. And we're going to do this as a shadow. And again, you can decide which way you want to shadow it. I'm going to assume my light coming from this side. So I'm going to kind of give it a base of color underneath the berries here. Something like that, a little bit different than what I did on that one. And kind of let that disappear by softening that edge. Okay, so reds and greens are complementary, and if I proceeded with the reds or even the scarlets right now, I would get some very muted colors that would be more brownish. So we want to make sure that has a chance to dry, and I'm going to start in on one of these fall leaves here. So in an earlier video, I pre-mixed a lot of the browns that you see in these compartments. And when you're squirting the paint out of the tubes, if you squirt a little dab like that into a compartment, so here we have the three warm colors, then I would take each of those three of the warm colors, squirt a little amount into one of these extra compartments. And then the key is that while it's moist, you can take a tool other than your brush and completely stir and mix it together. I used a stylus just to do my stirring. Okay, and you can stir it all up when the paint is moist, and then do a test, and you can keep adding to it. So start with a small amount and then add more of each of the different colors as you want. Completely stir it up and then test it. So here's my little test strip of all the browns that I did this pre-mix on. And by having that ahead, it's going to last quite a while, but it keeps you from doing one little tiny bit at a time. And now that we're into the fall colors, we're doing a lot of all of these colors, including some of the reds and purples. So I want you to see how we arrived at the browns that are in those compartments. So I found that it works the best for me to start with my lighter colors, or my yellows here. So this is the gamboge color, and I hadn't used it a whole lot before, but with the fall colors, it's definitely my highlight now. So I'm simply going to dab some bits of color onto my leaf. And I don't want it to be too uniform. I love picking up fall leaves and studying all the variety of color and pattern. So if I start with that gamboge and then I do the orange or the scarlet. Now even this scarlet is pretty bright orange, but if I get it from this compartment over here, I can dip into a little bit of the other browns and get a more muted orange. And I'm working rather dry at this point, so my colors aren't all running together, but I can skip around and do a bit of each of these different colors in a different area by using a rather dry brush. So next we're going to go to, I love some of these purpley colors in here. So let's see, let's do a bit more of the dark browns. So again, these pre-mixes of a dark brown, the fact that they've dried previously allows me to come back in with a rather dry brush and lift and get a quite concentrated brown without it being sopping wet on the brush. So let's put in some little bits of dark brown here and there. And then remember how as a child I hadn't seen fall colors and I was using all my crayons. They said the leaves fall and they turn all different colors. So when I did my artwork in first grade, not having been experienced fall leaves, I used purples and blues and everything else. So I haven't done much blue, but I quite like these rich purpley colors. And if you move from the browns, that had quite a bit of browns still on my brush. So let me clean my brush and my swamp water here, blot it off, get a little bit more from my clean water. And now this premix of a rather magenta purple, which was the quinacridone rose with the marine blue, gave me this lovely magenta, rich, almost burgundy kind of color. And again, that's going to be a complement to the yellow. So if the yellow or the gamboge were still wet, I would get even more brown. But since I did that first and I'm coming back later, they're not mixing together so much. And that's allowing me to keep all the interest of all those different colors. We need just a little bit of color on the stem, so I'll make sure my brush is rather dry, and just with the tip I can fill that in. Okay, so while that's drying, we'll come back now and use mostly scarlet here on these berries. If I wanted it to be a little bit more Christmassy, I might use more of the rose color, but the two together is quite nice as well. So I'm going to start with scarlet. I should have checked to make sure my brush was clean, and I want to go with a pretty intense color. So I'm going to assume here, whatever you do for highlight on your berries, at least just be consistent with it. So let's say our highlight now is about in that position on the berries. I can start by creating and leaving a little dry highlight just to keep the white of the paper. And oops, it's scarlet. So if you do this in a medium value, you don't have to rework it quite as much because these colors will be drying a little bit lighter, but I want a vibrant color. You could stop right there, but let's add a little bit more dimension now to try to get the more three-dimensional look here to our round berries. So now I'm going to dip into more of the rose and okay, and even some of this magenta to create, let's see, a still darker shade here. Okay, and if the scarlet is still damp, that's going to help these colors kind of blend together. But this crescent shape is what this round object, when the light hits it, that crescent of dark, like a core color, is what's going to make it look rounded. And if the light is here, then the shadow or the crescent will be to the opposite side. So another little touch of color there certainly makes it a lot more interesting. If your scarlet and red were really wet, they would be moving around and they might just blend together and even all out. So it's best with a little bit drier approach to get that effect. And then with a clean but still just a damp brush, if you have a hard line and you want to soften it a little bit, then you can just come in and touch along that line to blend it. The leaves are looking rather flat, and I had such a light wash that now I'm going to come back to this area of the darker olive colors here from the yellow and marine. Let's see if we get a little bit darker shade. Okay, here we go. So you could make a beautiful fall card out of this, but you could also push it toward the more Christmassy colors and make a beautiful card that way. In the autumn leaves set, you also have this funny little sort of dots kind of stamp, and watch how interesting it looks. When you stamp it on top of the leaves, I made it small enough that you could kind of move it around. You don't really have to mask anything, but it looks like the little holes or markings to the leaf that I think just add interest to it. So stamp a little bit of that wherever you like on the leaves or in the background. And these I may do some painting individual, or I might cut them out. I'm not sure which. But anyway, I wanted to show you why that funny little stamp is in there. Just to save time, I would proceed in the same way and paint this whole group, just mixing up, different combinations of the colors in the same way we did that single leaf. And I'm going to take this one and cut it out because I want to show you some other fun ideas for backgrounds. So on a lot of my cards, I had been using printed paper backgrounds, but I thought for those of you that don't have a stash of fall prints on hand, it really is fun to do some painted backgrounds. And so, move this out of the way. I'm leaving the white around it to support this little stem. If you want to cut it out up to the edges, you might just clip the stem away. So here we're using it against a printed pattern, and then we're going to play around with some different watercolor backgrounds as well, and then you can see how that white edge helps it stand out against the background. Next, I want to show you how I stamped these combinations, and the key is our sticky notes. So we'll just fast forward this so that you can see the progression. Basically, you have to decide what will be most in the foreground and what will be behind. And whatever's going to be in front, like this or the pine cone, is what you need to stamp first. So we'll just do that fast forward here. Okay, so again, I've got all different shades of browns and golden orange colors here. So by having all of that prepped ahead, it's very easy to begin your painting and move from one area to another. So with the pine cones, if I do a wash of the lightest color first, that's easy, and then the leaves will do as we did before. So I won't make many more comments, but you can see where I'm reaching for my different paint colors here. I had made this into a Christmas card previously, but having added this leaf, these colors are going to make it much more fall color. So I might just deepen my colors after all on that to keep a little bit more of a Christmassy look with that. Let's see. All of the berries on this side of the pine cone might actually be more shadowed by the pine cone itself. Now our pine cone needs some little bit of even darker shadows, which I will come back in where you see all of those little lines that begin to shadow the artwork itself. That tells you where you can shadow with color as well. A drier brush with that pre-mixed paint should allow me to do some more detail. If I wanted to follow some of those little lines with a rather dry brush. And then on this whole side, I'm going to darken it even further. Okay, so a variety of shades of color on the pine cone, I think, is what helps it come to life, and on the leaves as well. Instead of just all one color, we're really enjoying the variegated patterns of color. Kind of missing some of that scarlet, so let's add that in. Add a little bit deeper bit of color here and there. So what was fun about this one, I think, was creating those dark shadows, and as though this was sitting on a white tabletop. So let's revive here some of our gray. And this time I want to emphasize a bit more of the blue, so I'm just swirling into more of the blue. That's a bit darker, but let's go with it. It will dry a little bit lighter. And I'm just kind of imagining some shadows here, maybe from the stem. And you can kind of make it up. No one knows exactly what lighting you had or what surface it was on. That kind of brought out a little bit more of the purpley color. I'll lighten that a little bit. So try some fun things with that. And then I liked the torn edge with the rustic look here. Okay, now on this one, it's really strange that this one is floating and these other ones are floating. So this really needs some anchoring here of our shadows. And let's see. I'm going to do my shadows a little bit more of the olive color. So I'm pulling in some of the olive into the gray area. Okay, so now if the other colors are dry, particularly the reds or scarlets here, this lets me join the different elements into one by having this shadow. So if you want to make it more of a Christmas card, you might just use those and not the leaves, but you've got lots of combination possibilities. Next, I want to show you how effective a small vignette with a taped edge like this can be. So I will just get these all taped and stamped. What I really liked about this little vignette was the colors. And also on this one, I took it to some more muted colors, and some of the lavenders in there were particularly interesting. So let's do a bit of that just to show you how I mixed those colors. So on this one, the green is the olive color, and since I need that to mix with my blue, I'm going to remix some of my dark olive green here and with more yellow. This is with the marine and yellow in this compartment. And I'm going to revive my colors here. So I've got this olivey color, and I liked it muted even further. So I'm going to, I know I'm a little bit out of reach, but I'm going to bring some of that gray down here. And I had the green on my brush, so now that's giving me a rather gray-green color. Let's tone it down even further. Okay, so I might have painted the leaves first, but since I just want to show you what I've done differently on these, I'm going to do my shadows first in this case. And on this one I didn't mask, so you can have, but I did like how the way it just cut off on the edges actually gave me a very interesting design. So now for this beautiful kind of aqua color, I started out with primarily the phthalo blue, and you can see how bright a color that is. But now if right down here in this area, you lift some of that olive and mix it with the phthalo blue, that's where you get this beautiful kind of aqua color. And if you want to gray it down even further, reach up into that gray area and bring a bit more of that grayish color. And again, that's going to dry a little bit lighter. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and paint in this area, and we'll see how it looks after it dries. Okay, and when you tape things, then it's nice to color out to the edges to define that beautiful pop of white when you remove the tape. Might even paint one color over the other here and let those kind of blend together. Okay, so while that's drying, now on this one, I did an interesting experiment. So I'm going to mix up some of this purple, and this time the rose and the phthalo will give me this color of purple. I'm going to add some water to it. Okay, my brush is pretty wet, so I think this will work. So in this one, I wanted to create a sense of depth between which leaves were on top of the pile and which ones were underneath. And I thought it was an interesting thing to simply do some glazing of a lavender color to establish the highlights and the darks. So here this leaf is behind the other one. We're going to put lavender there. This one is on top. This one is behind. We're going to color lavender back there and follow it down through some of the veins. Okay. And then this one is even further back. So we'll definitely have the darkest values back here. Okay, so immediately that begins to push and pull the different levels by the change of value. I can lighten an edge a little bit. I can darken another area even further, okay? And you can follow some of the lines of the veins of the leaves as well. So I'm going to completely let that dry, and then, and I'll show you here, I even had a little bit of color, this lavender along the veins. And some people refer to this as underglazing as a technique, and this was the first time I had tried it, and it really gave me some interesting colors that were more muted, but I loved the shadowing that it created. So, oh, and I almost forgot, this one as well had quite a bit of the markings that made the leaves look old and weathered. So I'm going to add some of that just kind of in a random way here and there, maybe even more on this one underneath. So I'm going to only just start some of the painting, and we'll fast forward some of this. The comment on this one, these were really vibrant, cleaner colors from this area of the palette. And this area of leaves with the more muted colors is partly happening because of the values of the purpley shadows underneath. So I'm going to turn my palette carefully. And we'll just go ahead and fast forward this. And now as I get to these colors, I'm simply going to add all of my colors over that shadowing and kind of follow what I had done before. And those lavender shades are going to come through. So I did make this one on the top primarily gamboge, this one primarily scarlet, this one primarily medium brown, and that one mostly the darker browns. And that also enhanced the values of the leaves stacked up. And then most of the lavenders I painted over, but then I decided the lavenders were so interesting that I just didn't paint all of them. So we'll fast forward here, starting with the gamboge. So mixing some different variations of color and then creating the interesting shadowing with the lavender. And the background, I didn't want to get it too busy, but just keep it light to contrast to all of the leaves. But all of those different shades of color is what really makes it dynamic, I think. So next we're going to do a whole field of these leaves. And in this one, I taped down the edges, and then I could stamp across that taped edge with my VersaFine ink, and I got a nice, very visible black line. And I want to show another option for those of you that perhaps are already know and understand embossing, and just a couple of tips to make sure you understand the sequence that you have to do it here for the watercolor. So I took my watercolor paper, I taped it down on this little clipboard so that I could move it around easily. And next, instead of using the black ink, I switched to a Versamark, which is a clear, slow-drying ink. And since this would not have been very visible, I've done it ahead, but I just want to show you. So you stamp, and in this case, you stamp across the taped edge. Well, actually, you can sort of see that because I didn't get all of the ink off. Okay, so then I've taken my detail white embossing powder, and I have a bunch of it in this container so that I can very quickly show how if you spoon it over that edge, then, and actually that ghost of ink there lets you see where it is. And then I will heat this with my heat tool. And since I don't have it in reach, we'll go bzzz where we're heating it. The trick with this is, because it's white on white, the white powder will actually cover up that gray line because it is an opaque powder. But you have to proceed one leaf at a time, basically, and it is quite tricky to see where you've stamped one, when you get to the next one. So I didn't attempt to do any masking, but I filled up this whole area, stamping and embossing one at a time. And now that that's done, I will be able to show you the contrast of painting. On this one we see the dark lines, and this one we have white lines, and it will show up against the darker colors of paint. Okay, so again I'm going to start in with my lighter colors. I even had some yellows here. And I'm going to tend to go to darker colors overall because of the embossing. So I'm just going to do some little bits of yellow gold here and there. And again, now I'm painting very abstract. I don't care where the lines are, we're just going to do all of this color. And the same here. I left an opening in the middle on this one, and the light colors I just painted across the lines regardless of where the leaf was and where the background was. So this one now is fun to have the white resist of the embossing powder appear as we paint in the other colors. But you've seen me paint the other flowers. You've seen me paint the other leaves, and we're now just doing same kind of colors, but we're going to even richer, deeper brown colors and just painting them all in together here. This is where you wouldn't want to be mixing each color of brown as you go along, because you need to let these different colors all blend together. A little bit more wet on wet with this approach. So if you choose to do some embossing, your efforts will be rewarded as you get to adding all this beautiful array of color. The painting is quick compared to the stamping and embossing. Now that I can see the lines, I can go back in and enhance the tips of this leaf or this one. The first time I've done this here, live for you on camera. I actually prefer the magenta color I get here with the marine and rose. Gives me kind of that fun burgundy rich color. In this case, I can paint darker color behind the definition of a leaf to make that stand out. Okay, and then in the same way with this one, after we let it dry just a little bit, then we did some splattering. So let's see now how that will look on our embossed one. and with so much color, probably only a real dark color will show. So we need to get some brown that is pretty wet for this to work. And this compartment, I'm hesitant to add too much water to it, although we'll try it at this end, and it will ultimately dry, and then you can wet it again. I want a really dark brown, so let's see here. I'm going to test it here on this scrap. Okay, yeah, that's looking dark enough to show up here. Okay, and a tool just helps give it some friction there. Okay, let that dry a little bit. So this one with the open area in the middle would give you a place to add a message if you'd wanted to keep it a little bit lighter in that area. This one we just went everywhere all the way across. Taping this one onto the clipboard did make it very helpful to move it around and heat it and kind of turn it at an angle to see whether I was getting it completely heated or whatever. So that was helpful. The heat wouldn't come through it, but I would have been heating from the top down in this case, and that worked. So these panels fill the card entirely, and you could add a message in a white cutout or something and pop that up. But now let's take a look at some other options. If you had a leaf and you wanted to cut it out, on these they sort of just get lost in all of the pattern. So let's take a look at doing some other patterns here that are just very loose, and we'll show you a couple other ideas to create an interesting backdrop. So while this one was a resist of the embossing powder itself, now let's do a resist just with some crayons. And again, you may have some available to you, and I found some of the lighter colors. The white, if I use that, you won't be able to see what I've done with it. So I'm going to do a couple of things here, and you'll be able to see a little bit. Now this is just squiggles and just making some interesting patterns, and maybe I'll do some with this other color as well. And have something going off some edges here and there. And this one I'm not going to tape it down, and taping it did help keep it from getting bowed if you work really wet. But let's just experiment here with a couple of things, and I'm sure it'll turn out different than either of these. So anyway, we've got our color scheme down, and again, this color isn't going to be much contrast to our resist and our squiggles, but we go to some deeper colors. I'm just taking advantage of all of the mix of colors in this palette here and some of the darker ones. So now a darker color is going to help my scribbles show up. I'm going to move these out of the way. This one I did more just big blob brush strokes, and as well on this one. But let's show an even wetter approach here with this. So after applying some colors with a brush, if you've got your spritz bottle, now you can add more water, and this is going to keep the colors joining in. And as we add some deeper, darker colors here, we're going to get some fun movement just because of the darker colors. And here now my paper, since it's not taped down, is getting a bit bowed, but I can work with that as I just keep adding colors back and forth. So here's some of these interesting purpley colors. And I can leave white on the edges or go all the way out. Some of my colors will tend to flow to the sides. Sometimes I've just kind of pressed it down a little bit. Okay, and then the crayon resist is coming through in an interesting way. Now let's do some of that white crayon on top of this and see what that does. And again, you can't see where I went with it until we get some darker color on it. Okay, so now that's maybe preserving some of the lighter color that was coming through from underneath. Now let's add some splattering. And the wetter it is when you splatter, the more that will blend in and melt, so to speak, into the other colors. On these, I did some more of those olivey green, kind of darker colors and more purples. So you can have fun with any combination of colors. And if you carry through with whatever colors you were using on your other accent pieces, you can now create a backdrop that will have all of that same range of color to it, and find an area that helps your little leaf to really stand out against some darker colors. And this is where I quite like that white edge, I think, against these wild backgrounds. So when you're ready, you've got lots of ideas now to be able to paint all of your fall colors and leaves and really enjoy the Daniel Smith paints. Here's another extra credit idea that you may enjoy. Since we'd introduced some things with embossing, this is a perfect tie-in to take some of my Frontage embossing powders, like the chunky metallic seasoning, and I also pulled out some of the other, like aged wine, aged ochre, even the aged silver, or if you're into glittery things, there's even an embossing powder that's the gold tinsel, and other colors. But what I wanted to show you is we can really do some fun sprinkling of these powders. It gives us sort of the look that we had with the splattered paint. But now I've sprinkled it on. This is dry at this point. There wasn't anything wet. But by sprinkling from the top, I am now going to heat from underneath, and that is going to melt the powder into the paper. And I'm using my heavy-duty embossing heat tool here, and this gets a lot hotter than some of the other ones, but because we're going to heat from underneath, it will come through even on the watercolor paper. All of those little rough particles, as they heat, round out, get shiny, and gain in size. So sprinkle lightly until you see what your result is going to be. So the seasonings, if you were going to get just one thing, that has all the different bits of metallic and black in it. And some of these other ones also have a color to it, like this one is the aged wine. So besides the large particles, you have to spill a lot more of it to start to see some of the color. So I'm not going to try to do this right now, but that gives you the idea of the scattered look. And when you see it up close, you see the shine. Okay, so add some embossing where you like in my sprinkle method with Frantage embossing powders. So this week was fall, and next week is already going to be Christmas here in July. So give me some feedback if you like the way we're doing it this month, and we'll see next month whether we change the plan. But next week we'll be doing Christmas, and the week after will be Christmas, and then it'll be winter. So we're focusing that way on one set in each week and taking it from simple to more advanced options on one theme. Hope you've had fun. Tell your friends to subscribe with their YouTube account. Thanks for watching.